Well, the Switch 2 appears to be way better than I thought it was going to be. We're going to get to all of that in a second here. But let me just say, first of all, yes, I was a bit of a Switch 1 fanboy, one of my favorite consoles of all time. I did not like the flat design of the Joy-Con, so I switched it out with the hoary Switch Pad Compact. So I like that larger design. The OLED screen is gorgeous. I have a huge library of Switch 1 games, JRPGs, and everything else. So I'm a very big fan of the library and of the portability, being able to put it into dock mode and just be able to travel with it all the time, which I do. In fact, I'll be taking it tomorrow on a flight to Los Angeles. So again, I love the Switch 1. But I was really concerned with the announcement yesterday about the Switch 2 and this LCD screen. Similar flat Joy-Con experience and everything else. What is the performance going to look like? We saw Elden Ring during the Switch 2 event. It didn't look so great. So what are we talking about here? Is this going to compete with a Steam Deck? Is it going to be a bit more powerful? Is it going to look good in your hand? Well, it turns out a bunch of journalists actually were in New York yesterday during the event. And they got to watch the event live, and then they got all the hands-on experience time. And the guys over at GVG, at Good Vibes Gaming, I like these guys a lot. They're nice guys, and they were there in New York. And I just wanted to play their impressions because I think they gave it a really honest kind of look. And I have to say, I'm really impressed. So let's just kind of watch this together, and I'll kind of talk a bit.
If you're coming here for a hot take, you're probably not going to find one. I think our impressions are mostly positive.
And to be clear, this is coming from a completely hands-on impressions perspective. The guys back at the ranch have already been talking about all the finer details of price and stuff like that. But for us, it's all about the experience.
Yeah, we picked up the console. The first thing that we were able to do was actually hold the Switch 2 in our hands. There were several demo stations set up throughout the experience, which is, to my understanding, exactly the same one that the public is going to be able to experience, although we had a much longer session. But when you walk in, the very first thing are functional but inoperable Switch 2 consoles, if that makes sense. There's hardware in them. They're not dummy units. And we were able to take the Joy-Con off, snap them back on, kind of get a feel for how the console feels in the hand.
So if you've never been to one of these tech events, and I've covered a lot of these over the years, like Apple events specifically, you would go in and watch Steve Jobs give a keynote, and then we would be led out of the room and you would go into a hands-on area. So at the end of the keynote, Steve Jobs or Tim Cook later would say, hey, we invite all the press that's here, come on into this room and take a look at it. And it's usually a very well-lit room. Here, they've got these light boxes. So I'm sure that was incredibly frustrating for them to try to film this because it was light shining right in your face through these light boxes and all of that. So I know that that's probably difficult for them to do. And you always have these Nintendo people or Apple people or otherwise standing nearby, kind of coaching you through it, But I was impressed that Nintendo was telling these guys hey, do what you can with the Joy-Cons. Try to break them off. Try to snap them off. They're magnets. Try as hard as you can. I was impressed by that. Nintendo saying that to these guys.
And honestly, stress tested a bit. One of the first things I did at Nintendo's own encouraging, I tried to rip a Joy-Con off. I tried, not with all my strength, but what I would call an unreasonable amount of force, and I couldn't budge it.
You also did the dangle test. You were hanging the Switch from your fingers by one of the Joy-Cons, and it was fine.
Impressive.
Yeah, there wasn't even a hint of separation. If you watched the Direct, you know that is because, and this actually surprised me, the SL and SR buttons are made of metal. They are the magnets that hold the entire thing together. So they put some chunky, substantial magnets into the Joy-Con. I truly wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, and
if you look at the hoary switch pad here on my. Let me just take this shot here so you can see a little closer. This is the same thing with the Joy-Cons. You can see, it kind of bends. You can see it's got a little flimsy. I know it's not really great to see it, but I'm impressed that these things didn't budge at all, and they're magnets. That's pretty great. That's pretty great. That's pretty crazy.
The buttons themselves are also much wider than they were on Switch 1 Joy-Cons. Those were the M&Ms of buttons on Joy-Con 1 and really hard to press, but they're so much wider and there's more surface area, and pressing the buttons feels so much better.
Yeah, they clearly focused on comfort a bit more this time around with the Switch 2 Joy-Con or the Joy-Con 2. Buttons have a bit more surface area, but they have the same really nice tactility to them that the Switch 1 buttons had, like a short but satisfying click to each button. And I was really impressed with just how nice the finish of the overall console feels in the hand. Like it had almost a satin type finish that the Switch 1 doesn't have.
Yeah, it felt so much more premium than the original Switch 1 base model.
That's great to hear.
And even more so than the Switch OLED, which is a pretty big leap over the original in terms of feel, especially on that new chassis on the tablet. But yeah, just it's so comfortable in the hands. I mean, it'll be a long time before we get to actually, have long extended sessions with it in handheld mode. So it still remains to be seen if, we'll need accessories to play in handheld mode and make it comfortable. But first impressions, it does seem better.
Is that the SD card slot?
I was particularly impressed with the screen. Obviously, it's a much larger screen at 7.9 inches up from 6.2. But beyond that, it actually had a remarkable contrast ratio to it. Like, blacks looked very inky on this display, despite it being an LCD. It being a 1080p display means that it looked sharper than ever. Having variable refresh rate and 120 hertz on the portable display is also just
and
mind-blowing.
HDR
and HDR. Yeah, there's so much tech crammed into this thing that honestly, in an interesting way, it feels like Nintendo is kind of driving back towards wanting to be on the cutting edge of things. That the technology that they've put in here is enough to make it feel like it's not so tangibly far behind current gen offerings as to feel dated.
And we'll talk more about the game specifically in other videos, but I remember walking up to Mario Kart World, and we played it on TV first before playing it in handheld. And I remember walking up to the station and starting the game and being like, whoa, that's really sharp. That is not what I'd expect on Nintendo Switch 1. Seeing Mario Kart it was 1440p, right?
Yeah, Nintendo confirmed we were playing, the demo we played was 1440p.
That's impressive. I mean, again, this is like the softness. It definitely does not look, we want that crispness, that 4K appeal, that 4K look. And you don't get that yesterday from like watching a Nintendo Direct. You're not going to see that on a compressed YouTube video. So to see it face to face is really what I've been waiting to hear.
Looked incredible.
Yeah, it's really hard to understate just how impressive Mario Kart World looks in motion when you're actually playing it too, because it's one thing to watch it in a direct and to watch a trailer where you can pause and scrutinize and look at things very closely. It's quite another to be actively engaged in a race against people where you're focusing on the gameplay first and then the visuals second. I was just enthralled with how Mario Kart World performed and looked on the Switch 2, to say nothing of when we did get to play handheld mode.
And it's crazy, too, because, Mario
Personally, I play about my Switch maybe 50-50, 50 in dock mode, 50% in handheld mode, traveling in bed and stuff like that. So, this LCD screen, it's great that it's going to look great in 4K on a big screen television, a big OLED television, but how is it going to look in my hands? Because that's going to be 50% of my gameplay.
It's 24 players, it's a big world, but it's still, I don't recall experiencing a dropped frame. Yeah,
Mario Kart World performed flawlessly, which is what I was hoping to see from a console that is dropping in 2 months. This Mario Kart World is the launch game for the Switch 2, and so I was excited to see that it was polished to what I would call the Nintendo level of perfection, right? The same performance that we saw with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which of course is another completely rock solid game.
Yeah, and looking at a different game, Metroid Prime 4,
How did this look?
which we got to play in 1080p 120 frames per second.
That's what I want to see.
Just blew my mind. It looked fantastic playing at 120 FPS.
Can't wait. Okay.
Yeah, Metroid Prime was not on my list of games that were going to be 120 FPS games. I said previously on the Week in Nintendo that I thought we were definitely going to have 1080p 120 FPS games, but Metroid Prime was so far down on the possibility list for me. I thought we would have seen, frankly, Mario Kart World well before we saw Metroid Prime 4, because that seems to be a title that is meant to push, visuals fairly strongly. But I was super impressed to see what Retro's done there. Just the overall quality of the games that were on offer at the Switch 2 premiere event were impressive. Like I recaptured that sense of being unable to believe what I was seeing, even though I was in the room seeing and experiencing these things.
And, we got to play in a variety of different ways. We got to play some games in handheld. We got to play some games with the Switch Joy-Con grip, which I thought felt quite a bit more comfortable than the old one.
Yeah, the new Joy-Con grip, one thing you pointed out was that it actually has, I think Nintendo is calling them GL and GR buttons, these kind of paddle handle buttons, which is becoming more of a thing in the pro controller space. You see them on the DualSense Edge now. They're on the Switch 2 Pro controller as well, which is another interesting piece of hardware I really want to get to talk about. But overall, the Joy-Con grip is far more satisfying this time, and I just can't get enough of that magnetic snap. Like, it feels more like we're getting closer to the console actually making that sound from the commercials.
It's crazy, because when you bring the Joy-Con up close, and
it's crazy that he's holding it like that, and the magnets are just fine.
Pull kicks in. There's a lot of force. It's not a weak connection by any means.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people are going to have trouble believing until they actually get the opportunity to try one themselves. But
right, let's talk about the screen.
I remember feeling
screen.
Quite frankly, almost fear, like nervousness about when it was getting closer. I was like, oh, it's going to yank out of my hand and pull onto the console, like in the animations. And while it's obviously not quite that forceful, it pulls itself in very, very forcefully when you're holding it. It's impossible to connect that thing wrong.
It's snug in a way that the original Switch Joy-Cons aren't. Because like when you're holding the Switch 1, there's some give. Like when you're trying to twist it, and it doesn't feel good. There's a creakiness to it that makes it feel like it could break. I did not have that sensation with Switch 2.
Yeah, if anything, with the Joy-Con attached, Switch 2 feels like a Switch Lite. It feels like these controls are fully embedded.
Like one solid unit.
One solid unit, huh?
Yeah,
okay.
my Switch 1, heck, every Switch 1 I've owned, there's always been that little bit of play in the Joy-Con connection where it can move up or down to a concerning degree, in my opinion. There's none of...
So you see in the screen here, the big concern on LCD is like the black levels, right? How I really want this to be contrasty and beautiful in my hands.
Here, there's
and
no...
I should point out, like the Steam Deck, the original Steam Deck with the LCD screen is awful. I mean, Digital Foundry destroyed it. I mean, a lot of journalists, of course, have destroyed the Steam Deck LCD. Now the Steam Deck OLED is gorgeous, and so too is the Switch 2 OLED, or excuse me, the Switch 1 OLED. So you can get really crappy LCD panels, and you can get really nice ones.
That is unintended with those Joy-Con, and when it's fully together, snapped into one unit, it looks like it was built that way.
Before we get a little further into the controls, I thought the kickstand was interesting. Like, it's so thin, and it looks like...
I thought it was going to be really flimsy.
It looks so flimsy, like almost like the Switch 1 kickstand. But there's so much resistance in that kickstand that you can really dial in how much you want it to bend. That viewing angle, like if you set it where you want it, it's not moving. It's going to stay there.
Yeah, that Switch.
I was very impressed.
The first
by the
Switch 1,
and I shared concerns about it, because I looked at it and I was like, that is a very skinny kickstand for it.
Well, my Switch 1, and my original launch edition of the Switch 1, it broke off. So, the Switch 2 at least was better. It's more of, it's not as, it doesn't feel as flimsy on the Switch 1 OLED for sure.
Chonky device, and I was deeply impressed by just how much I was able to, like you said, dial that in. One of the first things I did when I got to hold the Switch 2 was I pulled the kickstand out and I just put my palm on it and pushed it down, and it went all the way down, and then I slightly pulled it up, and it, every point at which I didn't have to fine tune the placement of it at all, and it was on not like an ideal surface either. It was like a plastic light box with light shooting up out of it. Not something someone would want to rest a Switch on, generally speaking, and expect the kickstand to stay. But I was adjusting it by like just random amounts, trying to see if I could make it flop down, and it never did.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I thought it was funny when you were first getting your hands on the Switch 2 hardware, you couldn't find the SD card slot.
Yeah, the SD card slot is hidden right underneath the kickstand, which is where I expect.
No one wants to see that ugly thing.
But on the Switch 1 and the Switch OLED, and even the Switch Lite, it's in a much more obvious location. Like there's a deep groove in the back of it, where the SD card is a tiny speck against it comparatively. Whereas this one, that opening is just the size of an SD card, like just small enough to put a micro SD Express in there.
Keep it hidden.
For those of you that don't know, micro SD Express is the same size as the Switch micro SD. It's just faster. So it's just a tiny little slot. And in the environment we were in, because the lighting was kind of poor, like you'll see in our video footage that's on the screen right now, probably, that we were shooting against dimly lit conditions in most cases, so it was hard to see anything against the black body of the Switch when you had a light shining right in your face. But yeah, Brandon spotted it, and it was it's just right there. It feels like a very no nonsense design. You have the little pops of color that are playful on the Joy-Con rails, but outside of that, it's just a black handheld monster.
Good, I'm there for it.
It's pretty.
Give me a premium.
Pretty insane. I think the build quality on the system feels excellent so far.
That's great to hear.
That's of no concern.
Great. Now let's talk about the screen.
This isn't your Play School console anymore. This feels like a proper, device.
Not a Play School.
Yeah, it feels
console.
like a grown-up version of the Switch. Like this is
good
for people that have grown up with the console and now have disposable income. The Switch 2 feels extremely premium, and I would say that it feels much nicer than any other handheld, including PC handhelds that I've gotten my hands on. I would toss my Steam Deck out for this thing. I would obviously upgrade from the Switch one. It's the materials used here feel like they're of a whole other class than what was used for the Switch one. Obviously, it's still plastic, and I think the screen is also plastic. I couldn't really tell. And Nintendo didn't provide any details on
glass?
if they were using glass this time around. But I will say it had a very pleasing look to it. Like, colors really pop on that screen.
Okay, now that's what I want to hear about.
When you were playing Tears of the Kingdom in handheld mode, the Great Sky Islands, I remember feeling like, I don't know, there was something about the warm colors that didn't feel the same as what I experienced on my television, and in a good way. Like those deep warm colors, like I really got the feeling of that location because of that.
Yeah, and I imagine
Those
part of
colors
that is
do
due
look
to the
nice.
fact that the built-in display supports HDR, as we mentioned before, and that's going to provide you with a depth of color that just frankly isn't there in other instances. So I think that we're really in a scenario where it's just going to be this really cool time to be kind of a techie person, like if you're into gear, if you're into the specs and what's under the hood of these, there's a lot to really like here. I think that Nintendo has absolutely smashed it out of the park on the hardware front. One thing I did find strange is, of all the things, because we got to see, I'd say most things, they did not let us put our hands on a dock at any point.
A dock, really?
No, I mean, I didn't even see a dock I didn't see a dock that wasn't behind glass.
That's strange.
Yeah, it was. I understand.
That could be strange and troubling, but again, also maybe that no one really cares about looking at a dock. But I would. I want to see how this, because I hate the Switch 1 dock. I think it's terrible. I don't like the flimsiness of the plastic, and it's just, I hate that. I hate that design. And this one looks really nice. It looks sleek, easier maybe to drop a Switch into, because I always found it like, oh, I'm wobbly, and am I putting it in correctly or not? So I definitely would want to play with it. That's weird they wouldn't let them see those. I wonder
why Nintendo at an event like this would lock up the consoles.
Yeah,
because
that's weird.
This is, by the time you're listening to this or watching this, this will be open to the public. Same exact setup, just shorter time. They're not going to have these people in here for 10 hours.
Yeah,
But
that screen looks great,
it
doesn't
felt
it?
weird to me that we couldn't like just pick one up. I mean, because they had at various points throughout the venue Switch 2s and docks and accessories, pro controllers under glass that we could look at, and we filmed plenty of, but we couldn't, just ask them to like, hey, could you lift that up, and we could just pick one up and look at it real quick. And maybe that's just something they didn't. I don't think there's anything nefarious there. I think they just didn't think anyone would want to.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see there being a lot of reason to like play with the dock other than wanting to see that back shell coming off.
I mean, I disagree. Yeah, I mean, because it's a big part of the experience. I mean, I disagree. I think people would want to see that. And maybe at these larger press events, I mean, larger open to the public events, they'll have docks where people can pop it in, pop it out. This was obviously just a press event. But, when you go to an Apple event or a Google event or a Microsoft event, they don't have the chargers sitting there for you to play with. They'll never have like the white Apple chargers or any of that. That's not there you just get the device. That's it. So in that way, that's very similar to other press events that I've been to. But yeah, I would want to play with it, and I think to me it's a vital part of the overall experience is being able to use the dock. You're going to be using it all the time in TV mode, in couch mode. So I disagree with them on that point.
Honestly, one of the things about the Switch 1 I kind of hate, that original Switch dock, that like
Yes.
pull down tray that
Yes.
holds, that hides the cords and everything.
It's awful.
I hated that thing. I hated it so much.
Yeah, I would say that I'm not a fan of even the OLED dock design.
Me neither. Yeah.
I don't think Nintendo ever got it quite refined enough. And it certainly accounts for maybe, only one type of setup, right? Like if your cables drift off to the right of your console. If they need to go left, you're in a different situation. So I'm curious to see how the Switch 2's dock might mitigate some of those issues that people certainly have had with the Switch 1 dock over the years. But I have to say, everything I did see, I was very impressed by. I didn't have any issues with any of the design choices or anything. Do I wish they could have gone OLED instead of LCD? Yes, but that LCD is breathtaking, and
Really?
I really can't praise it enough.
Okay.
I still have a
Breathtaking?
lot of questions about it in the long run, but I think what I saw here today was so deeply impressive that I just can't wait to get my hands on this hardware again. But I do think we can't really fully talk about hardware without talking about its interplay with software. And I don't think there was really...
Yeah, and so that's going to be the big question, right? Is how do the games play? And I'll link it up, that video, for you guys to watch the whole thing, because they also, I think they're going to talk about some other games as well that they got to play. But I just wanted to focus on hardware, and I know it probably goes on from there. But yeah, hey, their impressions. I want to see that LCD panel for myself. I think, though, that this is way more impressive than I thought it was going to be from a performance standpoint. How it looks on the big screen, how it plays in the hand, what is the premium feel of this? Is it cheap plastic, or does it feel really like a premium product? Again, it's going to come down to the software. Hardware is one thing. I think one of the great design, Johnny Ive, used to talk about, the best part about a product is when the hardware gets out of your way and you just get to experience the gameplay. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see where things go with this. I have to say I'm way more impressed with it now, knowing that the LCD panel looks gorgeous, that the Joy-Cons feel premium, that the Pro Controller feels great, like all of these additional things, that the kickstand doesn't suck, and that it looks great on a 4K TV. So, okay. I'm way more impressed than I was yesterday. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on this. I'll link up that full video. It's a great video for you to dive more deeply into that and get their more first hands-on impressions. So thanks for subscribing. We'll see you next time, everyone.